Seems like every week we've got more and more shit to go through. I do a number of TikToks every day. I try to cover as much of it as I can, but I also want to encourage you to check out the Rational Boomer podcast. This is a show that's an hour to hour and a half long. It's every night, literally every night, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I'm doing the Rational Boomer podcast. I have the good fortune that I have a lot of listeners that send emails, so I get a lot of input from the listeners, and I always encourage that. From time to time, I also have listeners come on the program to be a co host. It all works out pretty well, and it gives us the time to hash out all the things that are going on. I don't think I've ever seen a time in history when there's so many different news stories. It's hard to keep track of them all, and it's hard to keep updated on what they all mean. So that's why we do the Rational Boomer podcast. We have more time to discuss these things, more time to look into what's going on and really understand it. So when it comes to November, we can vote with some information, some intelligence, and that's what it's going to take to save this country. So I encourage you to check out the Rational Boomer podcast. It's real easy to find. There's an audio version, there's a video version. Just go to rationalboomer.com. There'll be a list of links there. There'll be a link to the audio version of the podcast. There'll be a link to the video version of the podcast on YouTube. There's something else I'm doing now, too, in terms of the podcast that makes things a little more streamlined for folks. This was a suggestion by a listener. I'm taking the TikToks for the day and I'm compiling them in one little short podcast. Comes out around 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you just want an overview of what's going on, you can do that with the Not a podcast that comes out during the day. And early in the morning, the Rational Boomer podcast, which is a more extended look at what's happening. The most important thing we can have going for us headed toward November is to be informed, to understand what's going on. And the problem is the media doesn't tell us everything or doesn't tell us the right thing. So it's time we all learn what's happening so we can make an informed choice in November and make sure we get rid of these fucking Republicans.